Phantasialand may be one of the biggest hidden gems of the theme park industry. This beautiful park set in Brühl, Germany is reasonably compact, but its ride lineup is spectacular and definitely puts it on the world-class stage. And in this video, I'm going to look back at some attractions that used to be in the park, and some of these are just bizarre. Okay, so the first one we've got, and I'm going to apologise to any Germans watching this, I will attempt to say the German names, and I will probably get them really badly wrong, but I will try anyway. The first one is Gebirgsbahn, which is mountain railway. Now, this was quite a large ride. In fact, when it opened, it was thought to be the largest steel coaster in Germany at the time. It was super popular. It went on to have a smaller version, a powered version added for kids. But unfortunately, both of those rides were removed after a fire devastated them in 2001. And next one we've got is a ride that is technically still with us, but it's been rethemed a few times. It started off as Space Center. This is an indoor Vekoma attraction, a dark roller coaster. The queue initially had some space themes, as you'd expect from a name like Space Center. In 2001 it was rethemed to Temple of the Nighthawk, and it is currently sitting in the park as Crazy Bats. Now, I know VR rides get a lot of flack and people say they're terrible and they're not great. I have to say, I went on this ride in 2022 and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's the only VR ride I've ever been on, but they have done a fantastic job. I think the kind of cartoon style VR just was spectacular, really went well with the ride. I really loved it. Next up we have Bootfahrt, or boat ride. I probably said that really badly. This was a really weird one because every picture and every video I have seen, the boats are lopsided, they didn't seem to be very well balanced. And what's even more bizarre is that apparently there wasn't a fixed route. So you got in this boat and you just went off and did your own thing. So from what I've read, the queue just didn't disappear because it's not like a route that you'll be back within a minute, minute and a half. You could just go. Next up we've got Hollywood Tour. Now, this was an indoor boat ride through various scenes including Jaws, Tarantula, Sinbad and the Sailor, Frankenstein, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Tarzan, The Wizard of Oz and King Kong. Now, what's really weird here, at the start of this I said Phantasialand is spectacularly themed. It is so immersive, it is just world class. Certainly gives Disney and Universal a run for their money. However, their animatronics and their indoor dark rides are the exact opposite. They are so childish, so basic, so bizarre. This ride just looks really strange. Now, the ride closed a few years ago due to floods and it is currently standing but not operating, and from what I've heard, parts of it have been removed, so I don't think this is going to make a return. And next we've got another water ride. Initially this was one massive log flume and it was split into two. Now, we ended up with Stonewash and Wildwash Creek, two separate log flumes effectively. These rides obviously were removed and is now where Chiapas sits, which is a spectacular water ride. Features the world's steepest drop. Probably the only reverse through a disco section as well. Definitely a ride to check out. We have yet another boat ride. I promise there are rides on here that don't include water. The next one is Waltz Dream, which is Waltz Dream? I really apologise to any Germans watching this. This one was a little more themed than its predecessor, that crazy tub thing, and it did follow an actual route, so at least people couldn't just stay on the ride for however long they felt. But this ride, it's also gone. The last boat ride that we have, I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name on this one because no chance, but effectively they had a pirate ride. Now, there were elements of this that looked like a direct rip-off of Jungle Cruise in Disney. Very, very similar scenes. So this pirate boat ran for a few years. There was some damage in the cave and they obviously had to repair that, and in doing so they also rethemed this to a Viking ride instead, although some of the scenes that remained in the Viking equivalent were basically just reskinned versions, so there was still the jail scene. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense with the Vikings. Now, Phantasialand has had many flat rides over the years, and the first one that is no longer with us is a ride that was reasonably common at that time. You would see it quite a few parks. There are still some installations, but more than half of them now have been removed around the world, and that was Condor. Now, this was ride with 4 arms, with gondolas that rotated, swiveled, and the whole thing rolled and fell. Never been on one, but it looks like a sort of mini version of Enterprise at Alton Towers. If you're enjoying this list, hit that like button. I've set myself a crazy goal of hitting 10,000 subscribers by January 2025, so I'd really appreciate it if you could help me out and hit that subscribe button as well. Let's keep going with the list. And sticking with flat rides, the next one we have was Crazy Loop. Now this wasn't manufactured by Huss, but it was very similar to Huss Breakdance, except the carriages swiveled forward and back. I'm not sure if they did full revolutions or not, but certainly looks quite an insane ride. And yeah, another one that is no longer in the park. Now, I've said a few times that the park has put things in that on the face of it appear to be direct rip-offs of Disney. They had a monorail, which in itself isn't a rip-off of Disney. Many parks have monorails to this day, but the train was almost an exact clone of the one in Disney. So you can see why there's, you know, people saying this was taken from Disney. Initially it was just a ride, figure of 8 around the park, but they did include a dark ride section at one point where you went through a cave and you saw some prehistoric scenes. But it's an interesting one. This park isn't particularly large, so I'm kind of not entirely sure I see the benefit of the monorail system. It doesn't take very long to get from one side to the other. But they had one. So remember I said that they have some amazing theming nowadays, but they have some questionable theming in the past. Well, they had 2 rides which were pretty much the same model. One was a modern, a kind of more up-to-date version of it, but they had a ride called Polyp, which was kind of what you would traditionally think of as an octopus ride. And the cars had a really weird design, and there was this monster thing in the centre, which was just odd. That closed, and then the next year they brought in a ride called Spider, which was an updated version of it. Slightly better theming, but that didn't last. I believe it was only there for around 1 season. Now the park used to have their version of like a haunted house. It was a walkthrough attraction, Schloss Schreckstein. I need to get my false teeth back in, I couldn't say that. Again, as I said, this was a walkthrough attraction. It had scenes including a mad scientist, a werewolf, cemetery, vampire, all the usual stuff you'd expect from a haunted attraction. And the next one I've got here is quite weird. So they had an attraction called Silbermine. In German that's a B, not a V. Sounds like Silvermine, but it isn't. And it was, as you'd expect, like a mine train type attraction. It was apparently insanely themed. From what I've heard, it had over 130 animatronics, which is a ridiculous number of animatronics. The bit that's really strange though is that it wasn't quite an Omnimover system, but it was effectively one gigantic train that just kept moving quite slowly. So, you know, you got on and off this as it was moving, as you would with an Omnimover. The problem with this was you would, because it was going at such a slow pace, you would see a number of the effects reset. So for example, there was an element where the cave was supposed to collapse. It did. And then before you got to it, it reset, fixed itself. So another attraction that left, and to be honest, when you hear what replaced it, you're not going to be sad about this one at all, was a ride that was effectively a giant IMAX simulator ride. Initially launched as Galaxy, so there was space theming, and then it was re-themed into A Race for Atlantis, so obviously an underwater theme. That area is now where Rookburg is, and if you've ever been to Phantasialand, that is probably the most immersive area ever in a theme park. So to lose a simulator ride in favour of Fly, nobody's going to be sad about that. Alright, brace yourself, some shady German coming in. Gondelbahn 1001 Nacht. Which seems to translate to Gondola Lift 1001 Nights. Now, it did have gondolas. In fact, if you see images or footage of this, there were suspended gondolas, which I think they changed the sequence of this. They used to go around individually. I think they then later made it go around in groups of 3. But effectively, you'll see this going into this giant dragon's mouth and inside the belly. There is some 1001 Arabian Nights theming going on in there. spectacular as it was to see this going into that mouth, again, it just ties to what I've said, that their animatronics, their theming in those days was a bit questionable. They've definitely come a long way. So, speaking of bizarre animatronics and crazy animal designs, they had two shows, and the first one was the Kinsky, which was kind of like a monkey version of the Country Bear Jamboree from Disney. So yet again, calling back to, you know, them copying stuff from Disney. I'm not saying they did, before anyone gets in the comments, but you can see where parallels are drawn. This, as I say, was very similar. There was a bunch of monkeys singing and dancing and stuff, but it just looks really, really odd. And the last show we have, and again, this one just elevates it a little bit further, and that was Scala Star Parade. Now, these animatronics on one hand are very impressive. They have some fantastic range of motion, a bit like me, they were kind of all over the shop. But a dog Elvis? Geese doing the can-can? Clearly somebody was smoking some substances when they designed this, because yeah, that's a little odd. Well, there you go, guys. That is a selection of attractions at Phantasialand that are no longer with us. I think you'll probably agree the park has had some interesting past. It is a beautiful park. If you've never been to Phantasialand, I strongly recommend you get it on your bucket list. I went in 2022 mainly to go on Fly, but the whole park just blew me away. The theming, the ride lineup, the whole thing, it is just fantastic. So you really need to get out there. But yeah, they've definitely had some questionable decisions in their past. If you've enjoyed this, hit that like button. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios.